Welcome to the Holocaust Memorial Day 2021 UK ceremony. My name is Olivia Marks-Waldman and I'm the Chief Executive of the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust. We're holding this year's ceremony in such strange times. Who would have thought in January last year, when we marked the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, with the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge in the front row, that 1 year later we would have to commemorate entirely online. Coronavirus is having a severe impact on individuals and communities, bringing isolation and loss to so many. We also know that there are some who use it as an opportunity to foster division and increase hostility. Although we are separate physically, we are joining together online today. Despite the challenges, Holocaust Memorial Day is being marked across the country with the participation of thousands of people. And in joining us now, you are uniting with people across the UK, together in spirit and in commitment to learning from genocides in the past and standing against prejudice and persecution today. Thank you for joining us.
I'm joining from Canterbury Cathedral.
We're supporting from Leicestershire Police Headquarters.
I'm joining from London.
I'm joining from Belfast.
Wel, dwi'n falch i ymuno â chi o Gaerdydd.
I'm joining from Park Farm in Bath.
Hi, Theophilus Obwemi here, joining from Keckwell Grammar School in Orkney.
I'm joining from Bleak Fire Station in County Fermanagh, Northern Ireland.
I'm joining you from St Andrew's House in Edinburgh.
I'm joining from London.
I'm joining from 3rd Regiment, Royal Horse Artillery, Albemarle Barracks, Newcastle.
I'm joining you from York.
I am joining you from Belfast.
I'm joining you from Muckamushet in Leeds.
We will be joining the 1st Aviation Brigade at Watersham Airfield.
We're joining from the Haematology Day Unit at Guy's in London.
Ladies and gentlemen, 76 years ago, after many agonizing, heartbreaking years, light was finally let in upon the camps which had been the scenes of such unimaginable suffering. That appalling revelation showed the world the depths to which human nature can descend when people turn away from the light of reason, of compassion and of truth. It also showed us that even in the most overwhelming darkness, some wonderfully brave souls had, incredibly, managed to keep alive the flame of hope. We must remember their inspiring heroism. We must remember too that for all the horror of those years, it was the forces of light which, after enormous sacrifice, eventually triumphed. As we reflect on that time, we must, however, also remember the lurking danger. Darkness may be dispelled, but not destroyed. In the years since the Holocaust, the world has witnessed other genocides, and we have seen too often communities and minorities scapegoated, victimized, marginalized, persecuted, and abused. We've also seen reckless assaults on the truth and the deeply worrying growth of fake news and of irrational theories, not grounded in reality, but rooted in dark places of hatred and fear. We have seen reason rejected, objectivity abandoned, history discounted, even the Holocaust denied. As I speak, the last generation of living witnesses is tragically passing from this world. So the task of bearing witness falls to us. That is why the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, of which I am so proud to be patron, has this year chosen the theme, Be the Light in the Darkness. This is not a task for one time only, nor is it a task for one generation or one person. It is for all people, all generations, and all time. This is our time when we can, each in our own way, be the light that ensures the darkness can never return.
At 8 o'clock this evening, we will be lighting the darkness. People across the UK will be lighting candles safely in their windows to mark Holocaust Memorial Day. So wherever you are joining us from, please have your candle at the ready to join the national candle lighting moment at 8 p.m. Today, we remember 6 million Jewish people murdered by the Nazis during the Holocaust. Millions of lives taken under Nazi persecution of groups including Roma and Sinti people, black people, gay people, and mentally and physically disabled people. We also remember and honour those murdered in recent genocides that took place since the Holocaust in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Darfur. This evening, as we hear about some of the worst things that people can do to one another, we stand against hostility, division, and prejudice, which is still happening today. From the online conspiracy theories spreading misinformation to the recent events of violence in the United States, we know that we cannot be complacent and take our democracies and civilizations for granted. Because in our time, a recent history that we can almost touch, 6 million people were murdered simply for being Jewish. How do we begin to comprehend this fact? Who were they, and how can we understand what we've lost?
Before the Second World War, almost 10 million Jews lived all over Europe. Their families had been there for hundreds of years. And just as there was no one way to be European, there was no one way to be Jewish. Some Jews had to deal with anti-Semitism on a daily basis. Others have always been treated with dignity. Jews were single, married, divorced, gay, straight, or both. Some lived in poverty, some in comfort, and some were just about average. Newborns, teenagers, grannies, and everything in between. They worked as farmers, butchers, artists, musicians and doctors, street sweepers, bakers, tailors, business owners, teachers, and poets. Some Jewish women chose to cover their hair with wigs and hats and scarves. Others opted out for the fashion of the time, like glamorous waves, bangs, tight curls, and short fringes. Men wore bowler hats, kippot, double-breasted white suits, tuxedos, and top hats. Some Jews lived their life under strict God's law, enjoying a personal connection to God and observing the rituals. Others had a complicated relationship with God, and some didn't believe in God at all. Teenagers were squabbling with friends, studying, going to parties, and falling in love. Many children enjoyed a normal childhood, free from worries and full of dreams. Before the war, Jewish culture and Jewish presence was in every corner of Europe, and it was rich and vibrant and wonderfully diverse. The 10 million Jews living in Europe before the war were not representing Jewry. They were European. They were mankind.
This evening, we're delighted to be joined by the wonderful Chineke Orchestra, playing for us in a reduced and socially distanced format. Chinike's motto is to champion change and celebrate diversity in classical music. Chineke Orchestra playing Tradition from Fiddler on the Roof. Genocide doesn't happen overnight. Reflecting on the steps that lead to genocide makes us realise how fragile our civilization is and how urgently we need to protect it. Today, Holocaust history is taught in schools and children are learning about genocide. We went to schools in the UK to see what questions they had for us.
How could the Nazis murder 6 million Jews? It's such a huge number. How could they get away with that?
I've heard the number of 6 million before, but I never really thought about the people behind the statistics.
Now that we have social media and news reports around the world, can't we stop situations like this turning into genocide?
Holocaust survivors are living witnesses to a period that for most of us is already history. Today we are privileged to hear from Rachel Levy, Renee Bornstein and Ernest Simon.
My name is Ernest Simon. I was born in May 1930 in Eisenstadt in Austria.
My name is Renee Bornstein. I was, when the war started, I was 5 years old.
I'm Rachel, and also known as Rosina. That was my official name on passports, but everybody knows me as Rachel.
I enjoyed school. I distinctly remember my first school report, from which, if I could show you this, you will see that I was absolutely brilliant in everything, except handwriting. Handwriting was just okay, but everything else was sehr gut, and I was quite proud of that.
I was in a cozy home, a normal home, you know, nice, loving parents, and it was, you know, we children, until we had this roundup, we were very happy, and because it was a little town of 10,000 people. We could play everywhere because there was no cars. Only the Lord Mayor, the priest and the doctor had a car.
We had a pretty village, a river running through. In the summer we were swimming in the river, and the winter was iced over and we would skate over it. We were a happy village and very small, about 100 Jewish families, surrounded by mountains, because it was the Carpathian Mountains, and lots of other people living around the mountains who used to come down to the village to buy things. They used to buy things from my mother's shop.
In March 1938, the Nazis came in. They immediately started the persecution of Jews in Burgenland.
In 1942, all France was declared as zone occupée. Then it was a lot of roundup, more and more roundup, and very often Jewish organizations came to my parents and said, you should leave, you should put your children in security, and that the children stayed in life, because everybody knew it will be a roundup, we will be taken.
By this time Hungary was occupied, and the Hungarians were in charge of us, and they were the upset, well, they were our Nazis. We were not allowed to do lots of things, but at the same time they wanted the youth, the young men mainly, and eventually they took the young men out of the village. And my father was still a young man. He was included.
Nazis used propaganda, persecution and legislation to deny human and civil rights to Jews. They wanted Jews and their religion wiped off the face of the earth, as if they never existed. And they also targeted other groups, anyone they believed threatened their ideal of a pure Aryan race.
The Nazis believed that there was an ideal master race, which was blonde, blue-eyed, tall and strong. Anyone who didn't fit this ideal was targeted for persecution. This included Roma and Sinti people, black people, gay people, and those with mental or physical disabilities. The groups were treated differently, but all experienced persecution, including forced sterilization, being experimented on, imprisonment in concentration camps, and murder. At Auschwitz-Birkenau, Roma children, twins, people with physical disabilities, and others were experimented upon. When the person was no longer considered by the Nazis to be useful, when the research was complete, they were murdered. Hundreds of thousands of lives were destroyed because of Nazi oppression. And for those who survived, their suffering did not end when the war was over. Individuals had to live with the physical pain and legacy of the persecution, as well as the loss of family members, for the rest of their lives.
Nazis persecuted different groups in different ways. Many black people who lived in Germany under the Nazi regime were targeted, alienated, and murdered during this period. The Nazis viewed black people as a threat to the purity of the Germanic race. Nazi propaganda posters showing friendship across racial groups referred to a loss of racial pride.
Ronnie was born in Germany in 1921 to a white German mother and a black father, originally from Barbados. Ronnie would have been around 12 years old when Hitler came to power. In the memoir that he dictated to his wife Carol at the end of his life, Ronnie recalls that he was 15 years old when he had his first serious encounter with the Gestapo. Here are some excerpts from Ronnie's diary. They summoned me to their office. They asked me if I had a girlfriend, which I denied. They told me that they'd received reports about me holding hands with a local girl, Anne Mann. Someone in the Steingasse had reported us. I was terrified for both of us. I was ordered to go to the hospital at once. I had no idea why I had to go to the hospital, but I wasn't going there to find out. I was so pleased to get out of there. What I did not realise until a few weeks later was that the Germans were sterilising or castrating all coloured men with German nationality. A few weeks later, a coloured friend of mine was summoned to the Gestapo headquarters in Frankfurt. I never saw him again. I still had a German passport, so my mother applied to the British Embassy for a British passport for me. Looking back, that action saved my life. I'm sure if I had remained a German citizen, I would have disappeared into a concentration camp.
Holocaust Memorial Day was established as an international day of remembrance in the year 2000. Leaders and parties have come and gone since then, but the British government's commitment to learning from the brutal truth of the Holocaust hasn't changed. Whatever their political beliefs or agendas, all politicians solidly unite on the national significance of Holocaust Memorial Day. Today we're delighted to hear from the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, the Right Honourable Robert Jenrick, MP.
The Holocaust is personal to me. My wife's grandfather and grandmother were Jews living in Poland who escaped labour camps and met each other at the war's end, sharing the same extraordinary but not uncommon characteristic, being the only members of their families to survive. My mother-in-law, my wife and my 3 daughters are the result. Like all descendants of Holocaust survivors, their lives are in one sense miracles. On Holocaust Memorial Day, we hear first-hand testimony from Holocaust survivors and refugees and from survivors of the subsequent genocides. To listen to these voices is a great privilege. To meet survivors is one of the greatest privileges. On this day, we honour the memory of the millions of people murdered during the Holocaust. It is incumbent on all of us to be their witnesses, but also to acknowledge that the evil of anti-Semitism did not end with the liberation of the camps, not at all. It is with us today. We simply need to turn to our phones and search social media, or ask the experiences of Jewish people, like students at some of our universities. And we have to recognise that even if this mercifully does not affect us all, there are no bystanders. We all have a responsibility to see what's happening, to call it out and to act. I'm proud to support Holocaust Memorial Day and the trust that lies behind it. And as Community Secretary, I'm proud that we are planning a new National Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre to be built, I very much hope, next to the Palace of Westminster, in the shadow of the Mother of Parliaments. It will be the conscience of Parliament, and I hope go some way to ensure that we never forget and never repeat our past mistakes.
The trouble started with segregation, with Jews being outcast and forced to identify themselves with stars on their clothes, and ended up with them being murdered in ghettos, in mass graves, in gas chambers. With a deliberate state policy, families were torn apart, with parents making the heart-wrenching decision to send their children abroad to safety or to hide in separate locations. Nazis deliberately split families. Upon arrival at Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp, men and women were sent in different directions. Young and old divided, with those deemed useful kept alive, and all others sent to their deaths. More than 1 million people were murdered in Auschwitz-Birkenau. But it didn't happen overnight. From the time they assumed power in Germany in 1933, the Nazis used propaganda and legislation to deny human and civil rights to German Jews. Persecution of Jews escalated through Europe as more than 1,000 ghettos were built to isolate and dehumanize Jewish people. And in 1941, the systematic murder of Europe's Jews began. In Eastern Europe, Jewish people were rounded up and murdered. Jews were deported from every corner of Europe that the Nazis reached, from Greece and France to Norway and Slovakia. 6 extermination camps were built for the purpose of mass murder. Chelmno, Sobibor, Treblinka, Majdanek, Belzec, and Auschwitz-Birkenau. A total of 6 million men, women and children were murdered, 2/3 of the pre-war Jewish population of Europe.
My parents were faced with this dilemma because on the 11th of January 1939, they put me on a train bound for England. I was 8 years old at that time, and they had absolutely no idea whether they would ever see me again.
My parents decided with a very heavy heart to send us we were supposed to go to Switzerland. It was a Jewish organization called OSE, and they let us go to Switzerland, thinking we are going there. And we 32 children went on this lorry, and it was very, very hot, but we had to be hidden. All the curtains were down. Then we reached this clandestine border.
I saw my brother, and I was with him when they took us to somewhere which happened to be Auschwitz. We were taken into places where they shaved our heads. They took our clothes. They gave us other clothes, uniforms. And that was when they took us into the camps, and we were put into a barrack with the tiered the beds of boards, just boards. And that's where we were. I had people I knew. One of them was my mother's sister, a young woman. She was about 20, 21. And there were some cousins there, and we did nothing. We just kept taken out in the morning to be counted, get back to the camp and to the block, given soup and some brick-style bread, and that had to last. And that's all the food we got, this gritty, watery soup. We could see men in the next camp, but I didn't see my brother. Never saw my brother.
After we were liberated, the Lord Mayor, Monsieur Jean Defoe, he was afraid that the Gestapo might come back, and he sent us to Switzerland. It was a hotel, Carlton, converted in a center of Red Cross, and we were there. We were, I think, until November. My parents didn't know where we were really. And they found us through the Red Cross, I think.
A week after my aunt died, she died a week before liberation. And she didn't see the soldiers coming in, and we were liberated by the British, who came in with a lot of noise, and we made a lot of noise, as much as we could, welcoming them and asking for food. Please give us food, give us food. They were excellent looking after us, and they got us to some sort of humans, looking again like humans.
When the war was won, there were hundreds of thousands of displaced people who were trying to find homes and relatives. The true scale of the Holocaust and Nazi persecution started to become clear, and the world was shocked by the cruelty we were capable of. Today's cliched phrase, never again, meant something momentous at the time, that never again will we let division escalate to slaughter, that under no circumstances will we let innocent people be murdered for what they look like or what they believe in. And yet we know that genocides have happened since. Millions of Cambodians were experimented on, tormented and executed across the killing fields of the Khmer Rouge between 1975 and 1979. In the 100 deadly days in 1994, nearly 1 million Tutsis were raped, slaughtered, blown up and targeted in a genocide in Rwanda. Around 8,000 Bosnian Muslim men and boys over 12 years old were deported, murdered and bulldozed into mass graves in July 1995 in Srebrenica. In 2003, the Darfur region in the west of Sudan, the state-sponsored Janjaweed militia, targeted the black African population. More than 400 villages have been destroyed, civilians killed and raped. The conflict in Sudan continues to this day.
I can't believe that after Holocaust, the genocide is still haven't taken place.
I've heard people say never again, but why did genocides happen after the Holocaust in different countries?
I was wondering about the ordinary people. How could they let it happen?
We are privileged today to be able to hear from survivors of the Holocaust and other genocides. Listening to these extraordinarily brave people is an immense privilege. Every time they speak, they relive a deep trauma. They do this to warn the world. They do this for you and me. It's an honour to have them with us today. Survivors from genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur. Safari Ashley, Alphonsine Kabagabo, Sabit Jacopovi and Amuna Adam.
តើយើងទាំងអស់គ្នាមានអ្វីរួមគ្នាយើងបានកើតនៅប្រទេសផ្សេងគ្នានៅពេលវេលាខុសគ្នាយើងនិយាយភាសាខុសគ្នា
Our identity is what unites us. We have been all targeted for murder, for being who we are. And we survived.
Na dan sjećanja na Holocaust sjetit ćemo se 6 miliona Jevreja koji su ubijeni u Holokaustu. Sjetit ćemo se nevinih ljudi koje su nacisti ubili samo zato što su bili to što jesu. Sjetit ćemo se i naših žrtava, iz naših familija i naše domovine.
التوكي كيميلسي الدين دلدين دينون ديو غيمس كين كاين آلا دارفور ديو سلام كيسين سيكويلا سورولي ندارفور نداين وانغز سورو ينقس كنديه نكا
wena dik se'eng na kuin aleleyo ba na kuin dogala dog surmatiyo dogalang ki alang surmatiyo na ki alayne kaing Britania diyo kaing alang genocide o ibada jamaiya ala duin baruleke Darfur asang aging inyeting na kwa alang ki selam kungul daim baru na alang konak daim baru si kutumo
យើងផ្ទាល់ស្គាល់ការប្រឡាយពូជសាសន៍វាបានកើតឡើងពីមុនហើយវានឹងអាចកើតឡើងទៀតនៅថ្ងៃអនាគតប៉ុន្តែយើងទាំងអស់គ្នាអាចបង្ការកុំឲ្យវាកើតឡើងទៀតដោយរៀនពីប្រវត្តិសាស្ត្រងើបឈរឡើងប្រឆាំងនឹងការស្អប់ខ្ពើមនិងប្រើសម្លេងរបស់យើងដើម្បីជួយអ្នកដែលទទួលការរអើង
Nothing can bring back the memory of my family who were killed during the genocide against the Tutsi in 1994. But knowing that every year people come together and remember them and learn from their fate make me feel better.
I have been able to rebuild my life in the UK, despite arriving here without knowing the language or the custom. I was so surprised to discover that they are drinking tea with the milk here.
Attoki ine kela yu kele naskisingo alang genocide si Darfur karang na hope si aing alang daim baru lulle eng na inle jamail je na kibarkay.
In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we remember them.
In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember them.
In the opening of buds and the rebirth of spring, we remember them.
In the blueness of the sky and in the warmth of summer, we remember them.
In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember them.
In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember them.
When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them.
When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them.
When we have joys we yearn to share, we remember them.
So long as we live,
they too shall live.
For they are now a part of us, as we remember them.
Thank you to all our political and faith leaders, and of course to the representative of the next generation. Singing a Bosnian piece for us today is Hafsa Jalisi. Hafsa will sing Nemoj Zalit Suzama, which translates as Don't Grieve with Tears.
Nemoj žalit suzama, već se sjeti to vama. Nemoj da ti suza krene, kad probudiš uspomene. Nemoj da ti suza krene, kad probudiš uspomene. Nemoj žalit, oče moj, kad ugledaš mezar moj. Nemoj da ti suza krene, kad se sjetiš oče mene. Nemoj da ti suza krene, kad se sjetiš oče mene. Nemoj žalit suzama, već se sjeti tovama. Nemoj da ti suza krene, kad probudiš uspomene. Nemoj da ti suza krene, kad probudiš uspomene. Ko da duša poleti, sva u nuru izgori, zastane kraj kapije, redvan čuva ravlije. Zastane kraj kapije, redvan čuvar avlije.
I often reflect on the fact that I was so very, very lucky to be among those chosen to go to England on a Kindertransport. I was lucky to find a very welcoming, kind family in Leeds. I often reflect also on the fact that my parents were able to follow shortly afterwards on a domestic service visa together with my younger brother. But I also reflect on the fact that many members of my extended family were not so lucky, that they were murdered in part by the Nazis during the Holocaust. I also reflect very often on the hundreds of thousands of children who were not so lucky as I and who also were murdered by the Nazis. Now, we have a prayer in the Jewish tradition for the dead, for those who have passed away. And it's a prayer which I would like to say partly for my family, the extended family, but partly also for the 6 million Jews who were murdered during the Holocaust. This is a prayer which is known as El Mole Rachamin. It means God full of mercy. So I wish to say this prayer now. El Mole Rachamim, Shochein Bamromim, Chamtse Menucho Nechono Al Kanfei Hashchino, Bemaalos Kedoshim Utechorim, Kezocha Harokia Maschirim Es Nishmas. Achenu Bnei Yisrael, Hakedoshim Vehatchorim, Shenoflu Bidei Hagarosechim, Venishpach Domam Beauschwitz, Madanek, Sreblinka, Uvishor Machanos Hashmad Be'Europa, Shenechergu, Shenishchatu, Veshenisrefu, Veshenitbeu, Veshenechneku, Al Kiddush Hashem. Ba'avur shekol hakohol, hakodosh hazeh, mispalalim, ve'ad haskoros nishmosom, began Eden teche menuchosom. Lochein ba'al horachamim, yastirem, besesa kenofech leolomim, utzaror bitzaror, hachayim es nishmosom. Adonai hu nichlosom, ve'yonuchu al mishkevosom b'sholom, ve'nomar Amen.
Today, we stand in solidarity with those facing identity-based persecution right now. We know that sadly, hatred, anti-Semitism, racism, xenophobia and discrimination still exist in the world. Today, we see reports of Uyghur Muslims in China and Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar being persecuted and denied some basic dignity. In a world scarred by genocide, these reports bear a very painful resonance.
I saw the picture of the Uyghur Muslims with blindfolds on. It made me feel really sad.
We learnt a bit about Rohingya Muslims, but I can't understand why the world got into this situation.
I haven't really learned much about the genocides other than the Holocaust. I wish I knew more about Rwanda and Cambodia.
Identity-based violence did not end after the Holocaust. Hate, prejudice, and persecution still exist, with individuals and groups all over the world facing persecution based on who they are. Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar have experienced what the United Nations described as a textbook example of ethnic cleansing, with killings, rapes, gang rapes, torture, villages destroyed, and forced displacement. Nearly 1 million Rohingya have fled or been forced to flee their homes and are living in refugee camps in Bangladesh. Just 1 year ago, the UN's top court ordered Myanmar to stop genocidal acts. Uyghur Muslims in China have faced years of persecution. Evidence shows that at least 1 million Uyghurs are being detained in so-called re-education camps. They're being separated from their families and forced to do slave labour, including for many companies and brands that you would recognise.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Chief Rabbi Ephraim Mervis of the United Hebrew Congregations of the Commonwealth.
Today we recall how the light of humanity, decency and compassion was extinguished when darkness descended upon the earth. It was the darkness of unfathomable hatred, discrimination, prejudice and persecution, the darkness of abuse, torture, torment and oppression. Under its cloak, 6 million innocent Jewish women, men and children were systematically murdered. The tragedy was deepened by the darkness of indifference. Many failed to speak out, while many looked on in silence. But there were glimmers of light. Extraordinary people risked their lives to secretly save Jews. Resistance fighters courageously fought back despite unimaginable pressure. And we are continuously moved by our remarkable survivors who tirelessly shed for us the light of their inspiration. There were also glimmers of light during the subsequent genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur. Ordinary people disobeyed the Khmer Rouge. Some Hutus saved Tutsis. Some Serbs rescued Bosniaks, and some Darfuri civilians took on the Janjaweed. Darkness can only endure where we fail to shine a light, as can tragically be seen around the globe right now. In addition, the post-COVID era will bring with it upheaval, creating conditions which can precipitate dangerous winds of persecution. The Bible teaches, the human soul is the candle of the Lord. Indeed, we are the guardians of the fragile flame of our humanity. So let us never forget that even a tiny flame can banish darkness. If each one of us will become that flame, this will be a different world, a world in which light will prevail.
In the UK, we are fortunate to enjoy so many rights and freedoms. Yet we still know there are individuals and communities living in hardship because of who they are. The coronavirus pandemic and economic crisis have caused deep anxiety and frustrations, and have even been exploited to spread division and misinformation. As we look ahead, we must be vigilant to protect the rights and freedoms of all.
2020 was an extremely difficult year for us all, with a lot of lives, loved ones, jobs and all normality, feeling exhausted, lonely and anxious. Many of us were pushed to our extremes because of the global pandemic. The looming economic crisis has not only left people unemployed but helpless. We know that this economic hardship has often often been a breeding ground for extremism and division. There has always been racism and a fear of otherness, but with pressures rising, the angry rhetoric and confrontation also intensifies. Under the intense stress test of coronavirus, we are learning things about ourselves and the society we live in. While some of the lessons have been worrying, there was always a hope-giving light in the darkness of 2020. We have seen countless acts of kindness and humanity. Strangers coming together to help others in need. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things that inspire us to build acceptance and peace.
When I was 6 years old, with my dad, he teach me how can ride horses. Then I did with my dad 6 months. Then by problem our country fighting this government, my family passed away. Then I never see the horses. I went to refugees camp in Chad. After seeing horses, I feel myself is so happy because I remind my back home, horses. I like England because the country is safe and peace. People, so good people.
We can all create a better future together. We can all be lights in the darkness.
We'll end our ceremony with 6 memorial candles lit by Holocaust survivors in memory of the 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust. They'll be joined by Tobias Menzies to light a candle in memory of all other victims of Nazi persecution, and by survivors of recent genocides, lighting candles in commemoration of genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur. We'll close the ceremony by lighting the darkness together. Have your candle at the ready, and at exactly 8 p.m, we invite you to join us. But first, we'll hear from those who are at the heart of this ceremony, Holocaust and genocide survivors.
As a Holocaust survivor and a Nobel Prize winner, Elie Wiesel said,
"Whoever hears a witness becomes a witness."
You've heard us today.
You are now our witnesses.
There is still a darkness in the world today.
In the darkness, we all need to be the light.
So please, ride to the darkness with us.
Thank you for joining the Holocaust Memorial Day 2021 UK ceremony. I'm Laura Marks. I chair the Board of Trustees of the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust. I'm here to thank the extraordinary contributors who gave their time to create today's moving and thought-provoking event, and to thank you all for joining us. I hope it's inspired us to bring light and hope to our communities across the nation. With only a minute to go until 8 p.m, we're now getting ready to join the Light the Darkness national moment. As we each light a candle and put it in our windows for all to see, we remember those who suffered and those who survived in the Holocaust, under Nazi persecution and in genocides that took place since in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur. We light the darkness, standing up against all forms of prejudice and hatred still prevalent in the world today. We invite you now, with us here and at home, to light a candle and let its light shine brightly and with warmth outside every window in the land.
Households across the UK are now lighting candles in memory of those who were murdered and those who survived. We are all standing against prejudice and hatred in the world today. Thank you for joining us on Holocaust Memorial Day.